Let's go!
I think, yeah, a spoiler-free review is in order to first talk about it, just because I know a lot of people are going to be still through their playthroughs. This is a long game, and it's going to take, I mean, obviously a lot of people are at home right now, and people have a lot of time, but for any average person that's going to have to go to work and come back home and play this a few hours a night, it's just going to take you a while. It's going to take you like a month to beat. So my quick spoiler-free review. There was a lot to expect from FF7 Remake, and the number one thing that everyone was kind of looking to and from was the demo, right? The demo was the thing that was sort of setting you up. That demo is actually extremely representative of the majority of the game. The nice part is that the things the demo does well, it does really well, like extremely well in terms of like teaching the player and all these small things. Does it get any crazier than that throughout the whole game? It doesn't really. There's parts of Final Fantasy VII Remake that I think hit such high highs. They are so high, right? This game is the epitome of a roller coaster. I'm talking critically about it right now, right? This game is the epitome of a roller coaster. It is just bumps and turns and grinds and falls, and then there's moments where there's just not a lot happening, because a roller coaster has to rely on momentum, and that momentum can't keep itself that whole time, right? You're limited by force of gravity. So a roller coaster is the perfect way I would describe this game, because not all of it is perfect. Not all of it is exactly the epitome of game design and things like that. There are a lot of modern Square Enix video gamey aspects to this. But I can definitely say from Square Enix long running, God, I'm actually trying to go back to think of last Square Enix game I thought was really good. And I think it's 15 Royale. I like 15 Royale, but I'd actually even rate 15 Royale less than this. But that game came with a huge brevity of issues and problems and all this stuff. They're talking about like direct Square Enix, right? Straight from their offices, not a game that's like Nier Automata, which is made by an outside company. And it's weird, it's like Final Fantasy 12, Final Fantasy 13, the spin-offs like that Final Fantasy 0 game. It's been a long time, and Shadowbringers I think was the last one that really sort of brought people home. A lot of people really like Shadowbringers and Final Fantasy 14, but when it comes to their single-player game quests and their overall release of games, there's been some like, people are upset, like, right? These games are obviously good quality, but there's issues. Like, I couldn't even bring myself to play more than 2 hours into Kingdom Hearts. Couldn't even bring myself to do it. I enjoyed FF15, but I waited. Like, I was like, this game, I'm gonna wait. It feels like they're gonna be fixing things and adding things. I'm gonna wait. I think I'm good. When it comes to like the Final Fantasy series in general, I think this is the first one in a very long time, in terms of like mainline and not like MMO stuff, that they kind of hit it out of the park, right? Everything about this game is generally pretty damn good. It has, like I said, moments that are definitely lows, where it's not amazing. It's like, okay, this is fine. I guess this isn't great. But then it picks up, and the majority of the game, like the greater 75% of the game, is really high highs, where the things that they actually needed Final Fantasy VII Remake to hit on, hit super hard. And the things this game hits super hard on, the thing this game really nails is music, is characters. Dude, the combat, the visuals, outside of, you know, the weird texture thing, the storytelling. The story is a different thing. The way the story is told, I think, is actually quite good in this game. In comparison to something like Final Fantasy 15, holy sh! Like in Final Fantasy 15, I'd actually say the story in FF15 is good, but the storytelling, mega negative buenas. No good. But in this game, I think the storytelling is good, but the overall story like has obviously some issues, right? They have some issues, and we'll talk about that. But the things they really hit, the combat, the visuals, and the music, and the characters are fucking incredible. They're incredible. And to me, for me personally, you can have a movie or a narrative that doesn't have a great story, but it has good characters. Good characters will carry and create stories in your head. And if you don't have a super captivating, and even like, I think like the story in this game is still 95% of it is original Final Fantasy VII, right? It's just FF7. But the characters do so much. Oh my God, dude. See all Marvel movies, like, right? See every single Marvel movie. See any fucking Quentin Tarantino movie where like the story itself is okay, but it's carried by its characters. The characters, like, this game loves its characters so much. And like every little opportunity they have to put in references and nods and character building moments, they grab that shit and they make sure it's in here. Make sure it's in here. Wasn't not enough of that? Make sure it gets in there. Make sure it's all in there. And that's one of the things I was really worried about. The number one thing I was worried about is this going to sound like Kingdom Hearts? Are the characters going to be sort of weird and cringy like they are in Final Fantasy 15? Even though FF15 has good characters, it takes time. It takes time for that game to get good characters, but it happens. Is it going to suffer those issues that a lot of these giant big production Square Enix games have had for the past decade, it feels like? Are we going to be going through this shit again? And it's not. It's actually refreshingly good. Ridiculously good. Better than I thought it ever could be. The scenarios they put the characters in, the conversations they have with each other, the way everything happens for, like I said, 95% of the game is incredibly good. And there's like obviously one portion where things are like, whoa, what's going on? And things take like a big left turn. But dude, for the majority of the game, I love the characters in this game. Like, so much of their dialogue and so much of it is exactly what I wanted. Like, as an FF7 fan, I don't even much want to see the characters fight. I want to see the characters talk to each other and have meaningful conversations. I want to see characters develop. I want to see characters change. There's a lot of that in this game. There's a whole bunch of that. Like, every single character you see in this image right here, right, except for one, every single character you see in this image goes through a transformation of some kind. They go through some realizations, some changes, and they have proper character growth, just like the way they kind of do in the original Final Fantasy VII. And that was one of the things I was easily the most worried about. I mean, outside of the music, and I can't even, what do I even have to say about the music? Right? If there's anything in this game that is obviously fucking amazing, is the music. The music is incredible. Now, I don't even know if there's any contention in that situation. The way the music is utilized in this game is probably the best of any Square Enix game I've ever seen. The way the music sets up for moments, the amount of different tracks, the amount of tracks that shift from one element to another, as the game's behind the scenes was describing, like a DJ composing the elements of every single track. Mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing that they're able to surpass the music of the original Final Fantasy VII. And I love the original FF7 music. I'd argue that one of the biggest emotional ties that I have to FF7 is actually its music. Because the music in that game is incredible. Is absolutely incredible. So the fact that they were able to create resonating, emotional, heartfelt, and fun music throughout this entire game, the whole fucking game, probably gonna go down as one of the greatest soundtracks ever. Ever. And then last but not least, of course, besides things like characters and music, the combat. And I think I have read a lot of impressions, and the combat in this game isn't perfect. It's not perfect. Like many elements of the original Final Fantasy VII, FF7 is my favorite game of all time, but there are things I don't find perfect in that game. Absolutely. I think it's kind of weird after a very tragic event happens, everyone jumps on snowboards and woohoo! You know, there's some very weird pacing issues in the original FF7. Things like the combat, while they aren't perfect, what they managed to nail, the parts that are good about it, they do so well, right? The combat is done so well. And the coolest part is that outside of side quests, and side quests have some relatively like normal enemies, sometimes larger enemies, sometimes stuff like that. The boss fights, the larger fights, and the eventual scalability of those fights that happen throughout the game is amazing. Absolutely amazing. The biggest issue is obviously the camera. Obviously, air combat is just not fun. Luckily, air combat composes maybe 1/50th of the amount of combat in the game. So that would definitely need to be fixed, but it was like, if there's a flying enemy, it's obviously more annoying than it is kind of fun. And then, you know, the rest of the game, which is 49 out of 50 times, which is ground combat, is super good. It's very fun. Very action gamey, which I like about it. It's about timing, it's about movement, mitigating damage, keeping characters alive, and balancing, and have a crazy balancing act. And there's some bosses that exemplify the shit out of that, and some ones that I haven't even seen yet. It makes you feel like everyone's a team, right? You truly feel like everyone is working together, backing each other up. It doesn't feel like you are playing like an MMO light, like a Final Fantasy 12 sort of thing. Like Final Fantasy 12 is largely very similar in how its combat is sort of addressed in this game. But in that game, they know that you as the player can't control every character, so they have the Gambit system, right? It's like an evolution of that. When that game's essentially Final Fantasy XI's combat, but offline for the most part. And this one, like, everything feels so good. It just feels, every character just manages to be so much fun. It's ridiculous. Like, if you tell me like a character that I like playing the most between Aerith, Cloud, Tifa, and Barret, I couldn't even tell you which one I like the most because all of them they're so much fun. I can only imagine how much crazier it's going to get when future characters are introduced in future games. It really is the one thing, though, if there was one thing they had to nail in this game, even outside of like characters and music, which is the stuff I think they just knocked it out of the park, it's combat, and they did it. This game is super fun to play. It's incredibly fun. Even simple combat is enjoyable, but it really is exemplified in boss fights. And luckily, there's a shit ton of boss fights in this game. There is very few boss fights in FF7 Original Midgar, and they take bosses and characters that normally wouldn't be boss fights, and they make them big, giant spectacles. Huge, crazy, epic events. And they always feel fun, and they feel thorough. And the materia system is essentially the same materia system that you remember from 1997. It's the same thing. I'm really happy that they had the design philosophy to not take away the things that made the original Final Fantasy VII fun. Most of the things that made the original combat so good are all here. And you feel that all the way until the final battles of the game, which is genuinely fun. The only downside with it is that a lot of the smaller battles that are sprinkled throughout and in between a lot of the stuff, the grindy battles, as you would say, that compose a lot of FF7 Original, some of those fights aren't amazing. They're not. They're clearly not the best stuff in the world. You whacking around rats and whacking around bugs and, you know, weird hedgehogs and stuff like that. And they sometimes provide a challenge and they sometimes don't. I think there's literally a balance to be made for the future game, and that's an upgrade, right? That's an upgrade that I think they definitely can make. Fix air combat, fix the issues with smaller fights. Some of the smaller fights are a little weird. I'm really curious about hard mode, right? I want to see what hard mode is gonna bring to the combat, because I was upset that half the game, the regular enemies were dying so fast, right? That's the thing. It's the nature of trash mobs, right? It's just the nature of that stuff. It's like the same thing happens in the original Final Fantasy VII, right? With you fighting Shinra soldiers and everything. So many things in this game are like the original FF7, almost to a negative in many ways. I started thinking in this game, and I'm gonna get into some of my issues now. There's a lot of just walking around and just observing. There's a lot of just walking around and listening to characters talk. There's a lot of just moving from one place to the other, with very limited interactivity. For so much else of the game to raise the design principles that video games have changed over the past 23 years between like its music, the characters, the story between the characters is actually all really good, and then the combat is all fucking fantastic. The weird thing is that the level design is not amazing. And there's very few levels that I would find, this is super fun. The majority of levels are completely like bare bones average to not great. And they're completely carried by captivating character dialogue, interesting characters, the continuation of the story, as well as really fun combat and great music. If those things weren't there, my God, dude, the level design aspect in this game would be, it's like the exact same thing that people had issues with in Devil May Cry 5. It's very similar. The level design in these big Japanese like action titles isn't great, but that seems to be negated because the things that really matter is the combat. Like the combat is so good. The fighting feels so much fun with every character. I've had genuine like video game like, oh my God, what is happening type moments while I was in combat. And it wasn't a cutscene that was doing that shit to me, it was the gameplay. The game itself is just mind-blowingly fucking cool. Like, I can't even believe what I'm playing right now. And that's awesome. That feeling is amazing. I just really wish, right, that it had some fun, really fun dungeons, but it doesn't. And if you go back and think about it, that linearity, that feeling is very similar to the original Final Fantasy VII. I feel like so many things they were afraid to go too far, and like the level design is one thing. We don't want our players to be intimidated by the level design because we have an intimidating battle system. We don't want our players to have to worry about missing things. They make the level design so similar to the original FF7, where it is like painfully linear in the original game. I think they go a little bit too hard there. So much to the point where I'm only hoping that that was a design decision to make that very linear and to make it less interactive in this game, so that the next game can be the exact opposite, can be the big open world. Whoa, there's so much shit to do. I can only hope that the future of this is a much more expanded and even better Final Fantasy 15. My biggest worry for a lot of Final Fantasy VII Remake was that these issues were going to make the first game not good. Worst case scenario, Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 comes out. It's like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Critically, this game is like getting like high 80s and then like low 90s from the majority of review outlets, right? It's performed very well critically. And I was worried it was going to be kind of the low end, right? Kind of going to be like, well, the combat's fun, but man, like so many other things are just terrible, right? The characters are weird and stilted. The story goes in insane different directions. Characters are doing things that don't make any fucking sense in comparison to the previous game. That's really not the case. Like I said, the greater 95% of Final Fantasy VII Remake, the characters are doing what they do from the previous game. They're doing exactly what they do. They're communicating to each other, and they're voiced by actors and actresses that nail these roles, just kill these roles so well. So damn well. But at the same time, there's clearly some pretty big deviations, and the biggest deviation is clearly at the end of the game that a lot of people have discussed. And I would say for myself, the new stuff that they introduced into the game, I actually liked the bonus missions. I liked taking characters in between places and getting more backstory, but there was clearly a couple of missions, one involves sewers, that we could have done without, right? This didn't really add much. There's bonus character stuff, but like I said, the majority of those characters are freaking great. Like the majority of those missions are still super fun because the characters and the combat and the music make them fun. I'd say that represents a very large majority of the game, like 75 to 80% of the game is that. And it's just a blast. It's, dude, like characters don't come back and I'm like, where'd they go? That character was crazy. Where'd they go? Like I really enjoyed a lot of the new stuff that they put in here. And the expansion of already existing characters. Don Corneo is an exemplary example. The Honeybee Inn with Andrea is all exemplary examples that make everything so much better. These are the ways that they expanded the game in ways that you were not expecting. And they did it, and it's fucking great. It's so good. Yes, there is a big story deviation, and I think the lead up to that story deviation is abrupt because you learn very little about it, and there's not a lot of talk about it. It seems that the game is really focused on, obviously, the narrative of the original Final Fantasy VII, and then there's a big story deviation where we eventually pick up and essentially go in the same route, right? There's a big moment that it's like, what? What is going on here? Spoilers aside, because we'll save that for the spoiler aspect. I was definitely confused. I was definitely wondering which direction they were gonna go. It takes some thought, right? This ending is not a gut reaction sort of like, oh, like sort of thing. It takes some investment to sort of figure out what you think about it. I think that's super bold. So, like I said, the game is not perfect. Like FF7 Remake clearly could have had better levels, clearly could have had more interactivity. But for what this game is, and I've described this a few times and I'll describe it again, this is Yakuza FF7. They took essentially the gameplay structure of a Yakuza game, and they're like, let's do that with Final Fantasy VII. Just as much compelling characters and dialogue and well-acted cutscenes. Let's just make it Yakuza. And then we'll also sprinkle in music, right? We'll just make the music incredibly emotional. We'll make the story beats that happen throughout this game hit so hard. Like, my God, dude, like, I can't even tell you how many times this game just emotionally wrecked me. As an FF7 fan, wrecked me. I think the path of the Yakuza path for Midgar, I think that was smart. I actually can't think of many things I would really change in this outside of one obvious, like, big thing. I think the majority of the game, yeah, that's how I would have done in Final Fantasy VII Remake. That really is. That's how I would have treated these characters. That's how I would have gotten them eventually to Midgar, where they're going to be confronted with the open world. Introduce as many mini-games, as much tiny things, as many characters that can possibly talk. Oh, and I gotta say, as much as you maybe can't interact with characters in this game, the amount of world building and dialogue that is in NPCs is astounding. Astounding! Like, the fact that so many characters have so much different stuff to say, they have like 2 or 3 different things to say per character, but they also change what they say as story events happen. That's crazy to me. Like, you could spend so much time just figuring out the world building of this game by just walking around town and listening to NPCs talk to each other. There's just so much. And a lot of it's pretty good. A lot of it's pretty sad, too. The world feels really alive and lived in. And I think that's clearly one of the things that, as an FF7 fan, that I was worried about that they wouldn't hit. That it was going to feel like I was kind of playing Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy 13 again. For a lot of their games, it feels like I'm just running around these environments. It doesn't feel like there's much going on beyond them. And a lot of these Final Fantasy style games and Square Enix games, it doesn't feel like there's much going on beyond what I'm just running down this hallway to do. While this game doesn't give you that interactivity, it does give you enough backstory and character involvement and realistic, truly human characters to pull you forward. And I think that's really good. I think it's clearly one of the best Square Enix, like, directly internal games of the Final Fantasy, like, franchise. And I know the next game is going to be a lot different, right? Next game is not going to be the same very linear sort of Yakuza-style game. I think they'll still have those big cinematic set pieces, but I don't think it's going to represent the whole game, which is essentially what this is. Like, the thing I wanted the most was that me running in between set pieces, I just wanted more shit to do. And that's my biggest gripe, is that this game, I wish it gave me more stuff to do, even in my first playthrough. For me personally, and critically, I'd say, my critical review of Final Fantasy VII Remake is a 9 out of 10. A game that clearly has issues. A game that clearly is not the epitome of modern level design, like a Souls game, or the absolute best combat ever, because it also has issues. But the things that it hits on, which is elements of the combat, which is the characters, man, I can't even stress that Final Fantasy VII characters have never been this good before. They just haven't. Advent Children, Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus. These games have, like, good stories, but they have terrible characters. And they have terrible storytelling, for the most part. Like, Crisis Core, Zack aside. And that's the rough part, man, is that a lot of the stuff that's surrounding Final Fantasy VII outside of the original, which is pretty much left to your interpretation, characters suck, dude. They are not good. And I know because I recently played all of it, right? I recently played FF7 again, played Crisis Core and Dirge. It's a rough experience, especially if you're looking for, I just like to see Vincent do stuff, and yeah, and I want to see him talk to people. Like, ooh. This game does no issue there, right? And if the same people are going to be taking these characters through whatever the fuck adventure they're going to be going through, regardless of how similar to the OG Final Fantasy VII that is, regardless of how different to the original FF7 it could potentially be, I personally am kind of okay with that. As long as the characters are this way, as long as they sound and they act the same, as long as the new people and the new characters that they come across are represented just as well. If that's the case, then, you know, even FF7's story clearly isn't perfect and it's super convoluted, but if you have good characters taking you through that story, when things happen to them, you give a shit. And that's what makes the fights better, that's what makes the music better, and that's what overall makes the game better. The whole point of it being a role-playing game is that you're taking the role, and the characters that are with that role with you need to feel like they're real people. I want to go through and obviously do combat stuff again, but I want to go through and I just want to hear characters talk to each other again. 9 out of 10. But in terms of a personal review, I definitely give it a 10 out of 10. For me personally, the game clearly has issues. The lows aren't low enough to make me hate any aspect of this game. The lows aren't low enough. The highs are so astronomically high, right? Between, like, me having to remind myself that, oh, I'm just sort of running, you know, and looking at stuff, looking for things to be interactive, and they're not. But then I'm reminded by an extremely good character scene with extremely good music, and then we're presented with a very unique, like, battle situation that has great characters in it, or a boss fight that is just astronomical. So many of these boss fights are just incredible. The way those hit with me is a 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. I think it shares just as many issues as the original Final Fantasy VII has, which is funny. A lot of the issues that I have with the original FF7, some very clear similarities of that game as well, right? Some very clear similarities that make that my favorite game of all time, and I can acknowledge that there's clearly not some good shit in that game, but dude. For me personally, 10 out of 10. From a critical review-wise, 9 out of 10. I loved every minute. I was astounded, and I loved every single minute. I'm just thinking about it. I just want to play it again. I just want to play it again. Thank God there's a New Game Plus. Holy shit. I should almost give the game an entire point based on that. There's a New Game Plus. Holy fuck. I can't, that makes me very happy. That makes me very happy that we're going to give you an entire reason to keep playing through and keep doing stuff, right? Oh, I can't wait. Can't wait.